Attention, duped masses!
You're listening to Media Monarchy with James Evan Pilato.
Peak Portland, King Kill, and Robot Preachers. Plus This Day in History with Air France Flight 447 and our Song of the Day by Jens Lekman on your Morning Monarchy for June 1st, 2017. I'm James Evan Pilato. Welcome back to another listener-supported blast of media brought to you by you since 2005, my friends. Nearly 12 years going strong with independent, non-commercial alternative media. Coming to you, as always, from the Peak Portland studios up here in Portland, Oregon. Hope you're doing well. A couple seconds after 9 a.m. Pacific time. We are streaming live 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. MediaMonarchy.com/listen. We've got the new chat going on up in Discord, and you can find all the links to the stories we're going to talk about on the tweet feed right at the top. Hey, hope you're doing well. Welcome to June. We've made it, my friends. Huge thanks to all our supporters and donors and patrons and cheerleaders and fans and everybody. MediaMonarchy.com/support has the dreaded Bitcoin. But we've also got a post office box. We've also got PayPal. We've also got Patreon. Patreon really being the way to give us that monthly support that we can budget on and that we can keep going and growing. Patreon.com/MediaMonarchy. A huge thanks to all our donors and patrons there. Each day of the week on your Morning Monarchy, we focus in on a different area news. Monday's world news, Tuesday's tech, Wednesday's food, and Thursday is fucking weird. Not safe for work, as that F-bomb should let you know right there. Now, typically speaking, as I always like to say on these Thursday episodes, Media Monarchy is generally an adults-only broadcast. But Thursdays are extra rough. Thursdays we look at the occult, conspiratorial, chaotic craziness. Murder and mayhem. It's going to be another fairly brutal episode. So hide your kids, hide your wife. Put your critical thinking caps on, and let's look at the lamestream news before we dive into our hashtag Holy Hexes news. Trump makes his mind up on the Paris Peace Accords. No, wait, the Climate Accords. Sorry. Confusing my globalist agendas. Palestinians say embassy decision the best for peace. And they've started to turn, as we've seen all around, and as we've told you, once the culture police go after all the fake righties, they're going to start eating up all the fake lefties, and they're going to turn on themselves, because that's how this world goes. The Clinton News Network even reporting, in election blame game, it's time for Hillary to take her share. Nigel Farage doubts FBI Trump probe claim, and Putin hints at U.S. election meddling by patriotically minded Russians. Of course, my friends. Now, if you've read the book, you know how a lot of this all kind of works. Oh, and the Peak Portland update for you, and I suppose this is perfect, because we will dive right into the murder and mayhem happening right here in the city of Portland. Feds reject Portland mayor's pleas to revoke permit, so alt-right rally will proceed in a shaken city. Now, we talked about this briefly yesterday, that the Terry Shrunk Plaza here in Portland is actually federally owned. So after the murders on public transportation Friday afternoon, they wanted to cancel an upcoming rally. But they actually don't have the power to do that. Isn't that a fascinating... That's a whole other element and realm of discussion and research. We've talked about the things your cities do with or without you. All the money they invest in corporations that you have nothing to do with. All the Roundup they like to spray all around the city playgrounds and parks. But as is often the case, breaking news seems to happen once we're off the air with our morning show. And it did with a vengeance last Friday, when a 35-year-old white supremacist with a criminal record arrested in connection with stabbing deaths Friday of two men on a light rail train in Portland, Oregon. We call it the Max. You've heard me mention that a million times. 3 guys intervened. 2 were killed when Jeremy Joseph Christian of North Portland began to hurl anti-Muslim epithets at 2 women, one who was wearing a headscarf. Jeremy Joseph Christian of North Portland was jailed early Saturday on charges of aggravated murder, attempted murder, intimidation in the second degree, and felony possession of a restricted weapon. He's being held without bail and could face additional charges. The incident occurred on the Metropolitan Area Express light rail line known as MAX during rush hour Friday afternoon. The 2 men who were killed appeared to have stepped in to protect the woman from racial slurs. One of the men identified in a Facebook post by his mom, Talishan Mechie, a recent graduate of Reed College, Reedies we call them. Now, the story that I'm grabbing a little bit earlier doesn't have all the names released, but they've all now been released and everybody's pretty much out in the public. The strange update to this story comes when Jeremy Joseph Christian appeared in court.
Next this evening to the outburst in court late today from the suspect in the deadly stabbing of two Good Samaritans who were coming to the aid of two women on a train in Portland, Oregon. The suspect allegedly on an anti-Muslim rant. Tonight, ABC's Clayton Sandell on what happened in court.
Death to the enemies of America. Leave this country if you hate our freedom.
Tonight, the men accused of the horrific rampage on a Portland train, 35-year-old Jeremy Christian, made a belligerent first appearance in court.
You call it terrorism, I call it patriotism. You hear me?
Also there, facing his alleged attacker, 21-year-old Micah Fletcher, stabbed in the neck.
I feel very lucky. I wish I wasn't the only lucky one right now.
Fletcher is one of three Good Samaritans who stood up to Christian for allegedly hurling anti-Muslim insults at Destiny Mangum and her friend who was wearing a hijab.
He told us to go back to Saudi Arabia.
In the confrontation, police say Christian stabbed and killed 23-year-old Talishan Namkai Meshe and 53-year-old Army veteran Ricky Best.
Two men who worked very hard to build lives, to create connections, to have love, lost their lives. And there's nothing more special than that.
Just one day before Friday's alleged attack, police say Christian was captured ranting on the same train.
You got a problem with what I'm saying? All you Christians and Muslims and Jews.
His extremist views also on display at this April rally where he appeared to give a Nazi salute. And tonight, the FBI is investigating whether Christian should also face federal hate crime charges.
Now we jump to our buddy Lauren Coleman, who points out a very interesting angle that, of course, my local media isn't going to point out. Your local alternative media, all the free weekly papers that'll tell you all the best places to fuck and get drunk. But if you want actual information, your local city papers are usually garbage. As media accounts detailed, Christian had been a prominent and vocal participant in recent alt-right rallies in Portland, Oregon. At a free speech rally, what they just mentioned, in Montevilla City Park on April 29th, he was captured on video wrapped in an American flag giving Nazi salutes. Earlier that day, police reportedly confiscated a baseball bat from him. Local reporters captured him yelling racial slurs and threatening to shoot anyone who tries to disarm me. Christian wore, during past demonstrations, a t-shirt showing the drawing of the Zodiac Killer. That's right there. You can see it. American flag draped around him, Zodiac Killer t-shirt on. Huge thanks to Lauren Coleman for pointing out the dirty underbelly situations. Now, this is rough. You guys, I mean, without divulging my location, this is really fucking close to home. I've mentioned I watch PDX alerts on Twitter for the police scanner reports. The crime is getting closer and closer and closer to the close-in parts. It used to just be on the outskirts. And you can also pretty much chart on a map, crime is higher at max stations. If you follow the MAX train out of the city, you can watch the crime trail go outside the city. Now, I mentioned yesterday, about 12 years ago, when I was prepping to move to Portland, left my college town, stayed with my parents for about a month where I was pretty much getting everything together, shipping all kinds of things out here to Portland. And the one thing you do when you're at your parents' place, you see TV. It's the one place I end up watching TV, though probably once a year is when I'm at my parents' place. Possibly hotels. And I remember when I was moving here, it seemed like all the things I saw, flying in the face of all the things I saw at the radio station. Oh man, all the rad bands are coming from Portland. Then I turn on the awful television, and all I see are documentaries about Supercano, or whatever they call it, about all the volcanoes that are going to erupt, the massive, massive earthquakes that are going to destroy the Cascadia region, the Pacific Northwest. And I also saw a documentary about gangs, and they talked about the massive gang problem in Portland in the 80s. Our own Oregonian points out an interesting story from the past of Portland. nationally and internationally known as one of the most progressive cities in the U.S., an oasis of tolerance and good feelings. That reputation is a relatively recent one. The Rose City has a long, painful history of racially driven hatred. We were called the skinhead capital of the country by B'nai B'rith. Former Portland police officer Lauren Christensen told the Oregonian's Brian Denson back in '98. Christensen is the author of Skinhead Street Gangs, talking about Portland in the 80s, a distant era of transformation and discord that for longtime Portlanders suddenly doesn't feel so distant anymore. Last Friday, 2 men stabbed to death on a MAX train when they and another rider tried to protect 2 teenage girls from a local extremist who was threatening them with a racist diatribe. The senseless killings are a bloody echo of one nearly 30 years ago that shocked residents and made headlines across the country. On November 13th, 1988, at the corner of Pine and Southeast 31st, 3 neo-Nazi skinheads attacked Mulugeta Saral, a 27-year-old graduate student who was returning home after a night out with friends. One of the skinheads bludgeoned the Ethiopian immigrant to death with a baseball bat.
Okay, well, I'm still in Portland, Oregon, but I didn't want to leave town without stopping at one of the most notorious crime spots in the city, and definitely in the work that I do. This is Southeast Portland, Southeast 31st and Pine, and this is where Mulugeta Saral, an Ethiopian student, was murdered by 3 skinheads on November 13th, 1988. Saral was here in the country legally, working at the airport at Avis Rent-A-Car, driving a van, coming home with a few friends, and when he was stopped on the street by a gang of skinheads who were associated with Eastside White Pride, they exchanged words, and then the skinheads led by Ken Miski got out of the car and, seeing that Saral was black, beat him to death with baseball bats. 3 were sentenced to prison for murder. 1 of them is still incarcerated. And this spot is where we really started realizing that the skinhead problem was something to deal with. And one of the reasons I moved to Portland. He lived in these apartments right here, and they're pretty much the same. Famous spot, not a lot of people in Portland know about where it is, but this is it. All right, next stop, Springfield, Oregon.
He'll have to head off by himself because we're doing your Morning Monarchy for Thursday, June 1st, 2017. I'm James Evan Pilato, your host, webmaster, DJ, and so very much more. Getting you up to date with some of the bad that's going down. And a lot of this, yes, of course, it's all alleged. Let's get into the other developing and breaking murder and mayhem news. We only spoke about it briefly yesterday, but as has already been referred to, it doesn't take long for the culture police to come after you. All we had to do yesterday was make brief reference to Kathy Griffin. Kathy Griffin, longtime stand-up, longtime comedian, longtime provocateur of the conventional mainstream world. She was doing a little bit of a photo shoot. And now it's all this.
Comedian Kathy Griffin is now being blasted by First Lady Melania Trump for that disturbing photo holding a decapitated head of the president. As a mother, a wife, and a human being, that photo is very disturbing, she says in a statement to Inside Edition. When you consider some of the atrocities happening in the world today, this is simply wrong and makes you wonder about the mental health of the person who did it. According to published reports, Melania is beside herself because her 11-year-old son Barron was watching TV at Trump Tower when Kathy Griffin's gruesome photo appeared on the screen. Barron thought something terrible had happened to his dad, screaming out, "Mommy, Mommy," to Melania. The president is also tweeting about the shocking image. "My children, especially my 11-year-old son Barron, are having a hard time with this. Sick." Griffin is apologizing for the photo, which we're blurring because it's so graphic.
I went way too far. The image is too disturbing. I understand how it offends people. It wasn't funny. I get it.
Video of the photo shoot was posted on the comedian's website. Her comments to the photographer clearly show she was aware she was playing with fire.
We have to live in Mexico today because we're going to go to prison. Federal prison. Yeah.
She sure looked put together when she posed for the photo. Compare that to how drained and exhausted she looked on the video apology.
And I begged for your forgiveness. I went too far. I made a mistake and I was wrong.
The reaction to the image is universally negative.
No one wants to see this. You can be as mad at him as you want to. You can say stuff about him. You can do all kinds of stuff. Nobody wants to see this. It wasn't funny. It didn't work. And she's going to now deal with the consequences.
Here's what Chelsea Clinton said on The View.
It's never funny to joke about violence toward anyone, and particularly in this politically charged moment toward our president.
CNN says it has now fired Griffin as co-host of its New Year's Eve show with Anderson Cooper. He's also speaking out. For the record, I am appalled by the photo shoot Kathy Griffin took part in. It is clearly disgusting and completely inappropriate. And the comedian could be in big trouble with the Secret Service. Threats made against Secret Service protectees receive the highest priority of all of our investigations.
I beg for your forgiveness.
Beg for media forgiveness. This is the return of the King Kill memes. Almost exactly. I mean, what's the image that Kanye had on his Twitter feeds, of course, before he got the 5150 psych hold and deleted all of his social media? He's got the king decapitated with a sword through his ear. The King Kill memes have returned in full force. But when I'm gone, they'll sing a song about Immortal Technique, who beheaded the president and the princes and sheiks. You don't give a fuck about us. I can see through your facade like a fallen angel standing in the presence of God. Immortal Techniques talked about beheading the president, but he just did it in words. And no one really knows who Immortal Technique is, compared to big C-list celebrities like Kathy Griffin. Now, the so-called alt-right media, who, if I'm not mistaken, used to be really into covering this giant powers that shouldn't be meeting that kicks off in Chantilly, Virginia today. But from what I can tell this time, InfoWars sent 0 reporters to Bilderberg? Gosh, that sure seems funny. That sure seems to go against every fucking thing they've said over the last 15 years, but what do I know? Chernovich and all the other alt-right people, which even if you don't follow them on Twitter, you'll see the retweets because somebody you follow does. CNN has yet to issue a statement about satanic ISIS death threats made by its employee, Kathy Griffin. Contact their advertisers. Included in that, this is the great reply. At Church of Satan on Twitter says, please do not include us in this. You can really tell it's bad when even the devil worshippers are offended by it. They even reply to that. We are not devil worshippers. You're listening to the Morning Monarchy, Holy Hexes edition, and Holy Hexes it is. June 1st. Glad you're here. All the stories we're talking about can be found on the tweets. If you're listening live, you can follow along. I also feel like Holy Hex Thursdays are maybe the days where we can also give some of the most follow-up. And I don't know if that's my own intent that I put into it. I also know it's a lot of your favorite days. This is where we take pretty much the unfettered, unfiltered look at the underbelly. So we are able to follow up on a lot of stories. And again, I can't exactly answer that question. Do I do a poorer job at doing follow-up stories on world news or tech or health? I guess it just doesn't seem in my head as though I give those stories enough attention and enough follow-up, as we do with the strangeness. It's been nearly 4.5 years since Matthew Finner said he was beaten in a church sanctuary by a group of congregants hell-bent on expelling his homosexual demons.
Is underway in a trial tied to an abuse investigation at a local church. You're looking live from outside the courthouse in Rutherford County. Our cameras aren't allowed inside, but reporter Brianna Smith is there getting information for you. You may remember we have been covering this story involving Word of Faith Fellowship in Spindale for years. 5 members of Word of Faith Fellowship were arrested in 2015. That was several years after former member Matthew Finner claims he was attacked for hours for being gay.
Head was being flung back, my vision was going like brown and black. I honestly thought I was going to die.
All of the members will be tried separately. Today's trial is for Brooke Covington on kidnapping and assault charges. The church has maintained that the claims aren't true. And this morning, the judge threw out motions from the defense to move the trial out of Rutherford County or bring in a jury from another area. 2 jurors have been seated. They have dozens more to consider. Of course, as soon as we know more about what's going on, we will let you know.
From the Statesman out of North Carolina, after countless twists and turns, the long-delayed, high-profile case finally appears ready to move forward in North Carolina Superior Court. Jury selection began Tuesday for the first of 5 Word of Faith Fellowship members charged in the attack. Each defendant tried separately. The first defendant, as mentioned there, longtime minister Brooke Covington, 58, pleaded innocent to one count each of kidnapping and assault. If convicted, she faces up to 2 whole years in prison for beating little kids. It's not so bad there. Good Lord. I think a lot of what we do on these Holy Hexes episodes is really, unfortunately, brutally point out all your organizations, all your schools, all your churches, all your banks, all your government, all your hospitals seem to be run by multi-generational serial killers. Convicted nurse Janine Jones, already in prison for murder, now accused of killing up to 60 more babies.
A nurse already in prison for murdering a toddler in 1982 is now charged with killing another baby. As Don Champion reports, prosecutors believe that she may have been responsible for the deaths of up to 60 babies.
66-year-old Janine Jones was sure she was getting out of prison this March. Despite being convicted of murdering 15-month-old Chelsea McClellan in 1982, an old law to thin out prison overcrowding guaranteed Jones an early release from her 99-year sentence. That's until Bexar County District Attorney Nico LaHood charged her Friday with killing 11-month-old Joshua Sawyer in 1981.
I think she's pure evil. Plain and simple. Doesn't get any more complicated than that.
LaHood is convinced Jones is responsible for the deaths of up to 60 children in her care. They happened during a 2-year period when she worked as a pediatric nurse in Bexar County, Texas.
As parents handed over their children in trust, Janine Jones received them in deception, fully knowing her monstrous intentions.
A special task force is investigating the deaths one by one. As for a motive,
she has a seared conscience. She doesn't value life the way we do.
Investigators say little Joshua died of a fatal overdose of an anti-seizure drug. Chelsea died after she was given a fatal injection of a muscle relaxer.
She gave her a shot in her left leg, and she immediately started having a hard time breathing.
Jones was finally convicted of murder in Chelsea's death in 1984. She's also serving a 60-year sentence for injecting blood thinner into a 4-week-old boy who survived. Texas now has the death penalty, but Jones won't face it because of a law that was in place at the time the children were killed. If convicted, she faces life in prison.
So there you have people who love to abuse people, like to get into positions where they're able to abuse people under the guise of helping people. That's why all the creepy pedo cult guys like to get into Save the Children organizations or Boy Scouts, those sorts of things. That's why baby murderers love to go work at hospitals. Now, it's possible if Janine Jones could have gotten out of prison, she could have one of 2 jobs waiting for her. One, of course, with Planned Parenthood. The second, maybe she could hop on over to the Alabama prison system, where Alabama's quest to kill an inmate who spent decades on death row for murder became a high-stakes game of beat the clock after the U.S. Supreme Court finally cleared the way for his execution. Faced with a deluge of last-minute defense appeals and a legal deadline of midnight to execute Tommy Arthur for a 1982 contract killing, officers at Holman Prison in Alabama had to set the final stage for a lethal injection only 1 hour, 16 minutes after the justices lifted a temporary stay Thursday night. An officer performed a test to determine whether intravenous drugs had rendered Arthur unconscious about 3 minutes before his death warrant expired, saying the inmate's name repeatedly and pinching his arm without a visible response. Color was draining from Arthur's face, and his breathing was shallow at best when the clock hit midnight. A doctor pronounced the 75-year-old inmate dead at 12:15 a.m. Friday. Now, why the rush? Alabama officials raced the clock to execute a convicted murderer because the drugs were going to expire.
The state of Arkansas has executed its 4th inmate in just 8 days. Prison officials pronounced Kenneth Williams dead late last night, shortly after they administered a lethal injection The state says it scheduled the 8 executions during this compressed time period before one of its lethal injection drugs was set to expire on Sunday. And more U.S. troops will be heading to Afghanistan this summer. The Army is set to deploy 1,500 new troops to assist the U.S.-backed government. That happens amid attacks from both ISIS and the Taliban. The U.S. presently has 8,500 military personnel in Afghanistan. Just yesterday, 2 Army Rangers were killed there.
Now, you got to love it, because that's how ABC News put those 2 stories together. So, I mean, far be it from me to extract those 2 stories from each other, because they go part and parcel. We love death. We are built on death. We are a haunted house built on a graveyard in America. So it's good that they put the, never-ending war stories next to, of course, the never-ending death at home. Trying to kill little babies, trying to kill old men. And it's a race to see who can do it best. Arthur's lawyers had a flurry of appeals trying to halt the 8th execution date. They argued the state planned to use an ineffective sedative, midazolam, we've talked about it before, and said the last inmate executed in Alabama was awake through the procedure because he coughed for the first 13 minutes of his execution and moved slightly after 2 consciousness tests. The state prison system began administering lethal injection drugs around 11:50 p.m. Thursday, just before the death warrant was to have expired at midnight. These are our leaders. These are our so-called rulers. And as they're saying in the chat, death worship seems to be the only worship. And yes, only killing can stop the killing. How can we stop these killers? Well, we got to kill them. That's even in Run the Jewels. Went to jail and murdered the murderers there. Let's continue down the deep, dark hole on your Holy Hexes Thursday. This is an interesting story that when you actually image search the name Lucy Richards, you find this kind of young, cutie photo. Yet there's almost something a little Manson family about her. She looks nothing like those photos. The most recent one we have, possibly 2012, 2014. As we go to the Daily Mail, as we are apt to do on our Thursdays. An attorney for a woman who believes the Sandy Hook massacre was a hoax says she will plead guilty to threatening a man whose 6-year-old son was killed in the 2012 mass shooting at a school in Connecticut. The public defender for 57-year-old Lucy Richards said in court papers filed last Wednesday in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, that the case will be resolved in a guilty plea. Richard had previously planned to plead guilty but failed to appear at a March plea hearing and was later arrested at her Tampa area home. Under the previous agreement, Lucy Richards was able to plead guilty to a federal charge of interstate transmission of a threat to injure for threatening Lenny Posner, father of Noah Posner, 6, who died in the Sandy Hook school shooting in Newtown, Connecticut. Under that agreement, she had faced up to 5 years in prison. Terms of the new plea agreement have not been made public. Authorities say Richards made 4 voicemail and email threats to Posner on January 10th, 2016, including messages that said, "You gonna die. Death is coming for you real soon, and look behind you, it's death.
Death is coming to you real soon, and there's nothing you can do about it." She believes the shooting never happened, and she isn't the only one to think it's a hoax. This FAU professor was fired after he made comments alleging Sandy Hook was all a lie.
I'm at a loss as to why people so easily believe the government and the media, because they are among the most corrupt institutions, I think, in our society.
Richards was indicted on 4 counts of transmitting threats through interstate communications. If convicted, she faces up to 20 years in prison. Reporting live in Tampa, Brenda Lise Gonzalez, ABC Action News.
Another threat ended with, "And there's nothing you can do about it." Prosecutors said Richards told them she believed the shooting was a hoax. In the wake of the tragedy at Sandy Hook Elementary, in which 20 children and 7 adults were murdered, false conspiracy theories surfaced claiming that those affected were crisis actors hired to stage the massacre. Last month, Richards' lawyer told U.S. District Judge James Cone that she had contacted his office and said she was refusing to come to court for her scheduled hearing to plead guilty. When Richards failed to appear, Cone issued a warrant for her arrest. The 57-year-old woman lives in Brandon, Florida, on the state's west coast, about 4 hours from Fort Lauderdale Federal Courthouse, where she was meant to appear in April. In previous court appearances, she's used a walker and a wheelchair to get around and said she was on disability. Thanks, government. Others linked to the Sandy Hook massacre have reported harassment by conspiracy theorists who argued it was staged to erode support for Second Amendment gun rights. While free on bond, Richards previously was barred from visiting websites that promote conspiracy theories and was ordered to have no contact with anyone connected to the Sandy Hook mass shooting. Now, I've mentioned before, Sandy Hook happened only a couple months into my tenure as executive producer of Ground Zero with Clyde Lewis, and it was massive. And we got a lot of trouble. Someone actually started an outreach to some of the advertisers on that show, and we actually lost a few advertisers. They basically said, hey, do you know you're sponsoring a show that says this, this, and this, and had quotes from the show. You are listening to The Morning Monarchy. You're halfway through your holy hexes. You can do it. And it gets darker and darker and darker. An Illinois man accuses Dennis Hastert in a new lawsuit of sexually assaulting him in a bathroom stall when he was a fourth grader, at least the fifth such allegation against the former House Speaker, who will soon be released from prison in a hush money case. The suit was filed in a suburban Chicago court for a man using the pseudonym Richard Doe. It alleges Hastert abused him after the boy stopped during a bicycle ride to use the restroom in the 1970s in Yorkville, Illinois, where Hastert was a high school wrestling coach. The former Republican Illinois Congressman, 75, has nearly completed a 15-month sentence for breaking banking law in trying to pay $3.5 million in hush money to one victim, referred to in the filings in the criminal case as Individual A. Previous accusers had been in high school. Hastert's attorney didn't immediately return messages from the Associated Press on Sunday seeking comment. A hearing in the case was set for this past Tuesday. Richard Doe began crying when he recognized Hastert during gym at Yorkville Grade School weeks later as the man who abused him. The suit filed Friday in Kendall County Circuit Court says the grade school is next to Yorkville High School, where Hastert works. The suit says Doe was traumatized, repressed the sexual assault by Hastert, and was intimidated into silence. He says both Hastert and then Kendall County State's Attorney Dallas Ingmanson warned the boy not to make the accusations public. Reached Saturday by the DeKalb Daily Chronicle, Ingmanson told the newspaper that all these things the new accuser is saying is untrue. I have no idea what he's talking about. The suit was filed by the same Chicago law firm that filed a lawsuit against Hastert for Individual A. And this is when I will just point you over to Newsbud and Sibel Edmonds and the fantastic work they've done in connecting Dennis Hastert to not only pedogate, as seems to infest all of the aforementioned churches, banks, schools, organizations, but as it also relates just to the larger geopolitical scene. Hundreds of women were brought from Thailand to the U.S. and forced to be modern-day sex slaves, according to an indictment unsealed last Thursday that charges high-level members of what authorities called a sophisticated sex trafficking ring that concealed millions of dollars in earnings. The indictment brings the total number of people charged to 38, making it one of the largest sex trafficking prosecutions in the U.S., said acting U.S. Attorney Gregory Brooker. Authorities said the operation lured Thai women to the U.S. with promises of a better life, then forced them to work as prostitutes until they could pay off often insurmountable bondage debts. Women were rotated through several prostitution houses around the U.S., forced to work long hours and forced to have sex with strangers, even if the men were abusive, Brooker said. The latest indictment goes after money, estimated in the tens of millions of dollars, as well as high-level members of the organizations, such as house bosses. It charges 21 people with various counts, including conspiracy to commit sex trafficking by use of force or threats, conspiracy to engage in money laundering, and operating an unlicensed money-transmitting business. It builds upon an indictment unsealed in October that charged 17 people, some of whom have already pleaded guilty. Alex Koo, KHU, special agent in charge of Homeland Security investigation in Minneapolis, said going after the enterprise's finances was important. We hit them hard. It was a gut punch. Coos agency discovered the international ring after it began looking into a sex trafficking case in the Twin Cities in 2014. Former Minnesota U.S. Attorney Andy Lugar had made sex trafficking a priority and traveled to Thailand as part of the investigation. Lugar was among the U.S. attorneys forced to resign in March, but prosecutors in the office have continued working this case, approaching it as they would an organized crime network. The conspiracy began in 2009, according to the indictment, with organizers bringing poor women who spoke a little English from Bangkok to several U.S. cities, including Los Angeles, Chicago, Las Vegas, Phoenix, Minneapolis, Washington, Houston, and Dallas. The organization threatened to harm the women's families in Thailand if they escaped. The slaver stories don't stop. Oh, what? Oh, yeah, all those U.S. attorneys who were forced to resign in March because of the Trump train. And that's the guy who's, on the flights to Lolita Express with Bill Clinton and Jeremy Epstein. Is that the guy, I think? Here's also one of the bigger stories of this past week. Bigger stories in that they relate to the powers that shouldn't be and the massive exposés of sex crimes. We call it Pedogate. A de Blasio administration employee and leading New York young Democrat has been arrested on felony charges of child pornography. Jacob Schwartz, 29, was allegedly keeping more than 3,000 photographs and 89 videos of child pornography, including pictures of baby girls as young as 6 months old, court papers reveal. The highly illegal content shows young nude females between the approximate ages of 6 months and 16 years engaging in sexual conduct on an adult male, reported the New York Post. Schwartz's father, labor lawyer Arthur Schwartz, called his son's case a personal tragedy. He expressed he understood these are serious charges after watching his son's arraignment in Manhattan criminal court last Thursday night and said he's already receiving therapy. Schwartz surrendered to investigators in Manhattan's 13th precinct Thursday morning. That's 1 week ago today. He had been under investigation since March 29th after handing over his laptop with written permission to search its contents. Schwartz was the president of the Manhattan Young Democrats and the downstate region vice president of the state's chapter. In a statement to Daily Mail, the Manhattan Young Democrats said, quote, "The Manhattan Young Democrats are shocked by recent reports of criminal allegations against one of our members. The individual is no longer a member of the board, and an interim president is now in place. MYD maintains a deep and abiding respect for blah-blah-blah-blah." He is presently employed as a computer programmer analyst in the city Department of Design and Construction, where he works on the Hurricane Sandy recovery program and makes over $66,000 a year. He was hired after interning there in 2015 under the Bill de Blasio administration, working for the governor of New York. Schwartz had been involved in politics from a young age and helped his father campaign for Democratic district leader in Greenwich Village. His dad served as the New York counsel to Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders' presidential bid in 2016. Schwartz attended Lehigh University in Pennsylvania and was a member of an a cappella singing group. The 29-year-old has been charged with promoting sexual performance by a child, as well as possessing sexual performance by a child under 16, according to the Post. Both charges are felonies. And hey, guess what? He was released from jail on $7,500 bail. So there you got it. De Blasio employee Jacob Schwartz arrested for child pornography. Where's the outcry? Where's the coverage on MSNBC? I keep looking, I keep waiting. It ain't coming. One of the nation's most exclusive prep schools, whose graduates include both former Secretary of State John F. Kerry and the new Russia probe special counsel Robert Mueller, has just issued a scandalous, astonishingly detailed 73-page report outlining 4 decades of X-rated sexual abuse of students by faculty and administrators. St. Paul's School in Concord, New Hampshire, this week named 13 former faculty and staffers and also listed without naming them more than a dozen other former teachers and staffers who allegedly assaulted and raped various male and female students between 1948 and 1988. The report was signed by Luther Scott Harshbarger, a former Attorney General of Massachusetts, and it was commissioned by the school's Board of Trustees, whose chairman is Archibald Cox. Cox's father was the late Watergate special counsel who was fired by then-President Richard Nixon in the so-called Saturday Night Massacre of 1973. Both those Coxes are graduates of this school. Other famous Democrats who have graduated from the posh school with Episcopal roots include Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, Democrat of Rhode Island, and the late Michael Kennedy Smith, son of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Kennedy was accused of having an affair with his family's 14-year-old babysitter before dying by skiing into a tree in Aspen in 1997. Other famous St. Paul's alumni include former New York City Mayor John Lindsay and late TV actor Ephraim Zimbalist Jr. Late U.S. Representative Jerry Studs, the first openly homosexual member of Congress, taught at the school for years before abruptly resigning from the faculty in the early 70s. A decade later, Studs was censured by Congress for having an affair with a 17-year-old male page after plying him with vodka and cranberry juice while on a foreign trip. 2 years ago, a 2014 graduate of the elite prep school was convicted of sexually assaulting a then 15-year-old student. Owen Labree's appeal for a new trial was recently denied. This story goes on and on and on and on. 40 years of sex abuse at a New Hampshire prep school. I've got the link for you with the story and also the 73-page PDF report. Everything we say and play, always included in the show notes. As dark as it is, it's part of the work. We've got to put it on the record. Let's see if we can finish up through our amazing Holy Hexes headlines, my friends, with a little bit of Manchester numerology. According to the official story, a 22-year-old Muslim killed exactly 22 people at 22:33 on 22/05/17. Note also that 5 plus 17 equals 22. Exactly 4 years, 4 equals 2 to the second power, to the very day after the supposed beheading of Lee Rigby. So yes, Freemasonic Kabbalistic numerology all over it. 22 is the number of connecting paths in the Kabbalist tree of life, corresponding with the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. So that's a little bit of your Manchester numerology. So we go from 22 to 33 as a Florida sheriff's office says it's getting some promising leads after having devoted its Twitter feed to a true crime story written as if it were narrated by an 8-year-old girl who disappeared 33 years ago. Palm Beach County Sheriff spokeswoman Therese Barbara said Tuesday that the Memorial Day weekend campaign centered on the May 27, 1984 disappearance of Christy Luna. It's produced numerous leads that detectives are reviewing. Christy disappeared from a Green Acres neighborhood after leaving a small grocery store where she had bought food for her cats. A massive search never found her. No one was ever charged, although detectives looked at 3 suspects who Barbera said remain viable. It's been amazing. The sheriff's office posted about 50 tweets over 3 days, copying a campaign by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police to generate leads in the 86 slaying of 16-year-old Carrie Ann Brown of Thompson, Manitoba. That case remains unsolved. The first tweets last Friday using the hashtag #JusticeForLuna were written as if Christy were describing the day before she disappeared. Mommy is on the news. Now they'll be able to find me, right? Everyone is so worried. Breaks my heart to see this. I feel so bad for Mommy. She hasn't slept and this rain won't stop. Let's pretend it's a nightmare one we can wake up from. Jesus God. Missing girl tells her story on sheriff's Twitter feed 33 years later. Such kind of bizarre voyeurism. And you're almost sort of forced to take part in it just by interacting with it. People are still talking about DisinfoCon 17 years after the fact. Interesting interview and breakdown on disinfo.com about that amazing DisinfoCon many moons ago. And I remember that was one of the earliest things I downloaded clips from. And that's Grant Morrison, chaos magician, comic book writer, went there to talk about Invisibles, and he had just wrapped up his run on Invisibles, and he basically said he ate a bunch of drugs and ate a bunch of hash, and he gives this crazy speech. We're going to have to talk about the Invisibles very soon on your Morning Monarchy. We'll follow that under Book Smarts. Now, another follow-up for you, because last week we just didn't really have that much audio, and now we do have audio about that doomsday cult in Montana that's in the new video game.
We must atone!
Something is coming. You can feel it, can't you? You can feel that we are creeping towards the edge. I know that you are out there. And I know that you are in pain. But my children, I'm here to tell you that suffering is a choice, and you can choose a better path. We want you, we accept you, and we will take you, willingly or not. And some of you may fight, but in the end, you will thank us. I am your father, and you are my children.
Upon us! I shall lead you to the gate! For you are my children, and I am your father!
There you've got the real official trailer from Far Cry 5, where you get to play a federal agent infiltrating an apocalyptic group in Montana. Finally, on your holy hexes, a robot preacher that beams lights from its hands and can give automated blessings to the faithful has been launched in the town that gave fame to Martin Luther in the Protestant Reformation. The robot on show in the old town of Wittenberg is called Bless You Too. We'll have a little bit about Bono and Busho tomorrow, but it was developed by the Evangelical Church in Hesse and Nassau. It consists of a metal box with a touch screen, 2 arms on the side, and a head with eyes and a digital mouth on the top. After the robot wishes a user a warm welcome, it asks them if they want to be blessed by a male or female voice. It then asks the believer, "What blessing do you want?" which results in the robot making a mechanical sound as it raises its arms to the heavens and starts to smile. Lights then start to flash in the robot's arms as it says, "God bless and protect you," and recites a Bible verse. After the blessing, the user has the possibility to print out the dictum. It's an experiment that's supposed to inspire discussion. Robot preachers, my friends. That story and everything else make up your holy hexes for June 1st, 2017. We're going to go out with appropriately holy hexes style music from Sweden's Jens Lekman. But first, my friends, let's take a look at this day in history. Holy moly. June 1st, 1495, a monk, John Corr, records the first known batch of Scotch whiskey. Woo! Praise the Lord. 1779, Benedict Arnold, a general in the Continental Army during the American Revolutionary War, court-martialed for malfeasance on this day in 1779. 1812, U.S. President James Madison asks Congress to declare war on the United Kingdom. 1813, James Lawrence, the mortally wounded commander of the USS Chesapeake, gives his final order, "Don't give up the ship." June 1st, 1890, the United States Census Bureau begins using Herman Hollerith's tabulating machine to count census returns, and it's not the last time that people will use that to count them up. Jumping ahead, June 1st, 1943, BOAC Flight 777 is shot down over the Bay of Biscay, killing British actor Leslie Howard and leading to speculations that it was actually an attempt to kill Winston Churchill. Status always going to be status, and sometimes you've even got to beg for your status to come back and save you. 1958, on this day, Charles de Gaulle comes out of retirement to lead France by decree for 6 months. 1962, Adolf Eichmann was hanged on this day in Israel. And yes, 1967, it was 50 years ago today that Sgt. Pepper taught the band to play. And in this day in 1969, see, the Beatles like syncs as well. In Montreal, John and Yoko recorded Give Peace a Chance with the Smothers Brothers, Derek Taylor, Murray the K, and Timothy Leary. On this day in 1970, Black Sabbath's self-titled debut LP was released in the U.S. June 1st, 1974, the Heimlich maneuver for rescuing choking victims is first published in the journal Emergency Medicine. And on this day in 1975, the Rolling Stones begin their first tour with new guitarist Ronnie Wood. June 1st, 1978, the first international applications under the Patent Cooperation Treaty are filed. 1979, the first black-led government of Rhodesia, Cecil Rhodes, now Zimbabwe, in 90 years, takes power. On this day in 1980, the Clinton News Network begins broadcasting. 1990, George H.W. Bush and Mikhail Gorbachev sign a treaty to end chemical weapon production. Oh man, that's hilarious. Tell me another one. June 1st, 1991, the great David Ruffin from The Temptations dies in Philly of a coke overdose. 98, Scott Weiland arrested for drug possession in New York. 2001, Crown Prince Dipendra of Nepal shoots and kills several members of his family, including father and mother. A little bit of regicide. That same day, a Hamas suicide bomber kills 21 at a disco in Tel Aviv. They call it the Dolphinarium Discotheque Massacre. And two events on this day, June 1st, 2009, General Motors files for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, the fourth largest United States bankruptcy in history. And also on this day, June 1st, 2009, Air France Flight 447 crashes into the Atlantic Ocean off the coast of Brazil on a flight from Rio to Paris. All 228 passengers and crew are killed.
It was 2 years ago tomorrow that Air France Flight 447, on its way from Rio to Paris, crashed into the Atlantic off Brazil. Today, the French government said remains of more than half of the 228 people who died have now been recovered. Remains of 75 of them have been found in just the past week, near where the flight recorders were located by the same team that discovered the wreckage of the Titanic. Nancy Cordes tells us information on the recorders has given us clues about the actions of the pilots.
The cockpit voice recorder reveals it was the youngest of the three pilots who announced, "I have the controls," after speed indicators in the Airbus A330 malfunctioned and the autopilot disengaged. When a stall warning went off, the 32-year-old co-pilot initially pointed the nose down, as pilots are trained to do, to pick up speed and lift. But when he leveled off and a second stall warning sounded, he pointed the nose up. The plane began to rock, then stalled, plummeting toward the Atlantic for 3.5 minutes. Just 1 minute before the plane hit the water, he handed responsibility to the other co-pilot, who was 37, saying, "You have the controls." But it was too late. The captain of the jet, who at 58 was by far the most experienced of the three, had rushed back to the cockpit from a rest break, but it does not appear he ever retook the controls. An Air France official defended the pilots, saying, "We had an optimal level of competency in this Air France plane's cockpit. They were not able to regain control of the plane after it stalled." It's not clear whether they could have saved the plane, but it is clear they had only seconds to react.
There you have it. This day in history. Air France Flight 447 crashes into the Atlantic Ocean, and so many things that we talk about on the show in a lot of ways leave us with more questions than answers. Media Monarchy wrapped up a little bit of a vacation, this time a decade ago, and published to Media Monarchy. June 1st, 2007, Coffin delays Clinton fundraiser, a fundraising event for Democratic presidential candidate Hillary Clinton. This is the 07 campaign. Delayed 3 hours while Sacramento County Bomb Squad investigated a coffin brought to the area by anti-war protesters. And we also had your Bilderberg alert. Attention Planet Earth, your future is being decided at the annual Bilderberg Group Conference. A decade ago, they were doing it over in Turkey. Fascinating. Also published what I called a clearinghouse of just all the headlines, as Media Monarchy has been your source of a massive data dump of information for nearly 12 years. Activists go face-to-face with evil as Rockefeller confronted. TB patient's dad-in-law works for CDC's tuberculosis program. Questions about 9/11 get Army Sergeant demoted. Bush authorizes new covert action against Iran. U.S. flexes muscle off Iranian coast. Whitman will testify about 9/11 toxic dust. William Rodriguez, 9/11 hero, appears on Fox News in Boston. Many wonder, did Giuliani profit from 9/11? Senators still pushing CIA to release 9/11 report. Cheney impeachment bill gets another co-sponsor. Bush wants phone companies immune to privacy suits. Jeff Gannon's Bible reading marathon, and May Day and the posthumous influence of the Illuminati. All those stories and so very many more published at MediaMonarchy.com a decade ago. Celebrating birthdays today? Quite the batch again. Brigham Young, Frank Morgan, you might know him as the Wizard of Oz, Nelson Riddle, Andy Griffith, Marilyn Monroe. Charlie Wilson, he helped give us Al-Qaeda with his buddy Zbigniew Brzezinski. Morgan Freeman and Cleavon Little celebrating birthdays today. Pat Boone, Brian Cox, Jonathan Price. Hey, look, it's Ronnie Wood's birthday. The late, great Powers Booth, dying very near his birthday on this day. It's also Wayne Nelson's birthday from the Little River Band. Tony Snow, former White House press secretary. And yes, that wretched drummer from the Smiths, Mike Joyce, celebrating a birthday today. It's also Heidi Klum, Alanis Morissette, Brandi Carlile, Amy Schumer, Alan Wilder of Depeche Mode's birthday, and Simon Gallup of The Cure. Some of those folks might make their way into our daily DJ set at noon. You get an hour of news in the morning we call your Morning Monarchy, and a daily DJ set we call Pump Up the Volume. 2 live shows broadcast at MediaMonarchy.com/listen. We've got the Discord chat rolling, and we're essentially broadcasting 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, my friends. It is all brought to you by you. A huge thanks. Going out with appropriately holy hexy music from Sweden's Jens Lekman with a little song called To Know Your Mission. Check out the lyrics on this one. You can always hit me up, James at MediaMonarchy.com. And thank you so much for listening to this June 1st Holy Hexes edition of your Morning Monarchy. I am James Evan Pilato from MediaMonarchy.com. Thanking you so much for listening, my friends, and reminding you, as always, don't hate the media, become the media. Take care.
A Mormon missionary walks through Vasa Lane, through a clear as crystal Gothenburg morning. Removing his suit jacket, loosening his tie, wiping the sweat from his neck and the sleep from his eye. It's 1997, the last morning of August. At the corner of 7-Eleven, he hears the broadcast. Another saint is lost, lady dies, returned to stardust. He listens to the tragic news, followed by the top 10 tunes. Will Smith, Puff Daddy, Kala, Chumbawamba. On the other side of the street we pass this Cafe Java, when no one listens to that crap. Both coffee and hair dyed raven black, also sure of everything except one question. What's our mission? What are we here for? Who are we serving? What can we do? What's our mission? What are we here for? Who are we serving? What can we do? He bumps into a teenage boy leaning against the fence, who takes his headphones off and introduces himself as Jens. Rippling through the Book of Mormon, says it's way too early in the morning. Instead of talking about religion, can we just talk about how it feels to know your mission, to know what you're here for, to know who you're serving, to know what to do, to know your mission, to know what you're here for, to know who you're serving, to know what to do. To have a dream, a GPS in your heart, a path to follow through the dark. Well, Ian says I write songs sometimes, but they're kinda bad. So if that doesn't work out, I wanna be a social worker just like my dad. I just wanna listen to people's stories, hear what they have to say. My friends say just be a shrink then, but I don't know, I don't think I'll have the grades. But in a world of mouths, I want to be any. If there's a purpose to all this, then that's why God put me here. I know what I'm here for, I know who I'm serving. I'm serving you. I'm serving you.
You're listening to Media Monarchy with James Evan Pilato. Since 2005, Media Monarchy has covered the real news about politics, health, technology and the occult, all remixed with music and media that matters. Go to MediaMonarchy.com/support and become a monthly subscriber so you can help keep independent, non-commercial, alternative media going and growing. Thanks.